On a freezing winter evening, when the world outside seemed drowned in silence except for the whistle of the brutal wind, something stirred on Chris's porch, a voice, small and trembling, yet echoing with a plea that pierced through the stillness of the night. It wasn't the voice of a neighbor, nor the call of the storm, but the desperate cry of a creature left forgotten under the merciless sky. Chris was in his living room, warming his hands on a mug of hot chocolate during a commercial break, when fate itself tapped at his window. There, framed by the glass and snowflakes swirling like tiny white feathers, sat a cat. She wasn't merely sitting, she was begging, her body pressed against the cold pane, her nose leaving small fogged circles of breath, and her golden eyes burning like lanterns in the storm. The air outside was cruel, sharp enough to bite into skin, and the forecast had warned that by dawn, the world would be buried beneath fresh snow. Yet here she was, fragile yet unyielding, her soft white paw gently lifting, tapping the window as if whispering through the glass, "Please, notice me, save me." Chris froze, heart pounding. This wasn't just a cat, this was a cry from the wild, a soul reaching for a human hand. He walked toward the door, his steps slow but certain, as though some invisible thread was pulling him closer. As he unlocked the door, the cat stood tall, as if destiny itself had been waiting for this very moment. The second the lock clicked open, she slipped inside, bringing with her not only the sharp sting of the frozen wind but also the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Chris whispered into the silence, "How long were you out there, little one?" But no answer came, only the sound of her fragile cough, a rattling, heart-wrenching struggle for breath that made his soul tremble. The Bible says in Job 12:10, "In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind." That night, Chris felt those words living, breathing, and crying right in front of him. This wasn't just an animal rescue, this was God placing life into his care. And as he knelt beside her, tears prickled in his eyes because in saving her, he knew something greater had begun to stir within him. The cat wasn't just any stray. She was beautiful, yet her beauty carried the scars of survival. Her fur was white with soft grey stripes, but tiny frozen drops clung to it like glass beads, remnants of her battle against the storm. As she shook herself, the droplets scattered across Chris's carpet, falling like pieces of broken stars. Then came the cough again, tearing through her chest, so harsh that Chris whispered in anguish, "Oh God, you're sick too." His eyes scanned her fragile body, the scar etched across her left ear, the scratches on her face, silent reminders of wars fought in alleyways and shadows. He leaned closer, gently parting her fur, and that's when he saw them, tiny black specks crawling through her coat. Fleas, parasites feeding on her weakness. His heart broke. "You poor, brave girl," he said, his voice trembling with both pity and admiration. She wasn't starving, perhaps she had known some kindness before, but the wounds, the infestation, the exhaustion in her eyes told of a different story. She was a warrior from the streets, carrying battle scars like medals of endurance. Chris walked into the kitchen, his thoughts storming like the winds outside, and returned with milk, warming it gently as if every second of delay was a cruelty. He placed the bowl on the floor, but the cat bolted to the corner, cowering, her body shivering with fear. Chris's heart ached at the sight. This wasn't just hunger or cold. This was a soul scarred by mistrust, a creature who had learned that humans often meant danger. So he sat, silent and still, whispering into the quiet, "It's okay, sweetheart, I won't hurt you." Minutes passed like hours. Slowly, cautiously, she crept toward the bowl, her golden eyes never leaving his face, ready to flee at the smallest movement. When her tongue finally touched the milk, Chris felt his heart swell with relief. That moment was no less than a miracle. In her fragile trust, he felt the whisper of another verse. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. Tonight in his small house, predator and protector, human and stray, were learning the language of peace. Her purring rose softly, tentatively, like the song of a broken heart being played again after years of silence. And Chris realized, this wasn't just survival, this was the first note of a symphony of healing that would change both their lives forever. The hours passed, and with each moment, the bond between them grew like fire warming frozen hands. Chris offered her leftover chicken, though she barely ate. She was too tired, too overwhelmed by safety after so long without it. But her eyes followed him everywhere, golden lamps glowing with wonder. She padded slowly through the kitchen, sniffing corners, brushing against walls, her tail trailing like a ribbon of smoke. When Chris reached down and stroked her fur, her purr roared louder, vibrating through the silence as if her very soul was saying, "I want to belong, I want to trust." He whispered gently, "Don't worry about being cold anymore. You can stay as long as you need." And even as he said the words, he knew deep within he didn't want this to be temporary. This wasn't just a guest, this was family. Upstairs, his old tabby Oliver slept unaware, but Chris's mind was far from his sports game and his hot chocolate. His thoughts wandered back to his own past, to the boy who once longed for a puppy in a high-rise apartment where dreams were trapped by concrete walls, to the soldier who roamed the world without a place to rest, to the man who had built this house after years of searching for something that finally felt like home. And now in this quiet night, a cat scarred, coughing, frightened, had chosen his porch, his door, his heart. The Bible says in Matthew 10:29, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny?" Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your father's care. Chris felt the weight of those words. This cat was no accident. She wasn't just lost and found. She had been sent a living miracle, a reminder that love often arrives in the most unexpected forms. Watching her make herself at home, pouring at blankets, gazing at the falling snow through his window, Chris laughed softly, tears in his eyes. Because sometimes when you open the door to cry in the dark, you aren't just rescuing an animal, you're rescuing yourself. By the time dawn arrived, snow had blanketed the earth outside in pure white silence. But inside Chris's home, warmth filled every corner, not just from the fire or the hot chocolate, but from the steady rhythm of a cat's purring beside him. She had chosen her spot, curled on a folded blanket in the guest room closet, her chest rising and falling with the steady peace of safety. Chris stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, his heart overflowing. He whispered softly, "Welcome home." And though she didn't wait to hear it, the room itself seemed to echo his words, as if heaven had sealed their bond. What began as a freezing night of loneliness had blossomed into a miracle of companionship. One human, one stray, two wounded souls, both rescued, both healed. And as the snow fell quietly outside, the world seemed to whisper a verse of eternal truth. Psalm 36:6, "You, Lord, preserve both people and animals." This wasn't just a cat. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a story of survival, of trust, of love, a heartwarming animal video come to life. A viral YouTube story written not by cameras but by destiny itself. And Chris knew as he closed the closet door gently so she could rest, their journey had only just begun. The house was warm, safe, filled with the hum of life. Yet in the guest room, Chris found himself face to face with something far greater than he could have ever expected, the beginning of a miracle wrapped in fur. The cat, whom he had rescued from the storm, seemed to breathe out relief in soft purrs each time their eyes met. "You sure know how to make yourself at home," he whispered with a smile, watching her curl into the blanket as though it was spun from heaven itself. He wasn't a cat expert, not even close, but in this moment none of that mattered. What mattered was that she trusted him, that a soul battered by the cold, scarred by survival, had chosen his home as sanctuary. Each gentle rumble of her purr felt like music, like an unseen choir singing, "You are not alone anymore." And for Chris, who had carried his own scars from years of solitude and restless wandering, that meant more than words could hold. The Bible says in Psalm 36:7, "How priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings." As he tucked her into safety, he realized that sometimes God's wings look like a soft blanket and a human heart willing to open its door. He thought the story would end with comfort. But that night, the heavens had written a far more dramatic chapter. As the hours crawled forward, the peace of her purring transformed into something unrecognizable. The calm was shattered. The cat who had nestled into his guest bed began packing, her paws tapping frantically against the wooden floor like thunder in miniature. Her eyes, once softened by relief, now burned with desperation. The sound that came from her throat wasn't the sweet lull of a contented animal, but the ragged, heart-wrenching cries of a creature torn between survival and duty. Chris rose from his bed, heart pounding. "What's wrong, girl?" he asked, voice shaking as he watched her scratch the door with a frenzy that spoke of unbearable urgency. Her cries echoed through the house, each one a knife of anguish. When he